preaching, I'll upload the slides afterwards. So, now we can think about, just like policy mixes of fiscal and monetary policy. Like we saw, we could get out of a recession with a small expansionary fiscal policy move and a smaller monetary policy action, right? The two of them working together, right, double their efforts. So you can think about now, like, combining exchange rate policy and fiscal policy. So here we want to see how we can reduce the trade deficit, but keep our domestic production constant, right? So how would you go about moving towards protectionism? So maybe this is the chapter, the pages that Donald should have been reading, right? So what we want to do here is see if we can go from a trade deficit to a balanced trade, but not change output. So see if we can do something to keep everything else constant. All right, so what we can do, if we want to increase our net exports, we can bring that about by real depreciation. So if you're all honorary Americans for a minute, so let's be Americans and we want to reduce our trade deficit with China, we need to bring about a real appreciation, real depreciation. So there should be fewer Chinese goods that we can afford for a US good, right? Or currency, we get fewer renminbi per US dollar. Chinese goods need to become more expensive relative to US goods. We went through the calculation of how some people think we could do that, right? But so a real depreciation, that's what needs to come about, right? Another way we could think about doing this with monetary policy, right? Fewer renminbi per dollar. What if we increase the US money supply, right? Reduce the value of the US dollar. Depreciation, the US dollar, the US currency worth less than it is today, right? Then we would be able to afford fewer renminbi per US dollar. Right? That's one possibility, or two possibilities now of how to bring about real depreciation. But what this would tend to do, right, so the real depreciation on its own, epsilon goes down. This means we're going to import less from abroad. The imports are more expensive, right? But our exports are cheaper, right? So this is going to improve our trade position, but it does so exactly by reducing our imports and increasing our exports. Well, remember, in terms of domestic production, we're increasing our exports, so that's going to tend to increase our production. Reducing the imports doesn't offset this because this is goods that are coming from abroad that we produce. Okay? So this would tend by itself to increase output. And we can now reduce this increase, so shift ZZ prime back down, right, if we engage in contractionary fiscal policy. Right? So we could reduce government spending, right, or increase taxes, and decrease the value of US currency, for example, if we want to balance out trade and leave everything else constant. Right, this might be a more fiscally sound measure. Right, we could balance the budget in the United States and balance trade at the same time. The question is then this real depreciation. Here we get to this, what we're doing here with the lines is just perhaps maybe a little bit more sophisticated than pretending we have numbers that aren't there, right? So which depreciation against which currency, by how much, and how do we do that in a targeted and realistic measure? All right, so let's think a little bit more now about the current account. Now, right, let's look at the financing side. Right? So let's get to this IS behind the model. We can look at the closed economy IS, the name where that comes from, the IS equation. We're just looking at the goods market. Right? We can sort of draw a diagram of our original like goods market we had before. We have production, households consume, right? They buy some production from firms. They're gonna, the income, right, so households earn income by working for firms, by owning firms, right? The factory owners and our factory workers, all the same. They take their income, they buy consumption goods from firms, they have to pay taxes to the government, right? And the rest of their income, they save. Right? Okay, firms, right? They have the revenue from sales to give to their owners, which is the households, and their workers, which are the households. The revenue comes from selling goods to households for consumption, from selling goods to the government expenditure, right? And firms themselves purchase then investment goods, right? Some of the production goes towards building investment goods. Right? And now we bring these together, the household savings and investment, with our financial sector. Right? So we're going to say that investment is equal to savings. Right? If we have a balanced government budget, right, then this holds exactly. And that's how we close the model for the financial sector. Now, right, if we let governments run a deficit or a surplus, then we're essentially going to say that investment is equal to savings, private savings plus public savings. Right? So the government takes in more tax revenue than it expends in government expenditures. It has a surplus. Right? This is going to be savings. Right? The government is then going to, right, lend these resources out. Right? It's not going to be borrowing resources. Right? So we could have a situation where we have net investment equal to zero because private savings is completely taken up by public savings. Right? Now, right, and we can start writing things here. You know, we can start writing out, like, so y is equal to c plus g plus I. Right? We're just writing out outflow and inflow by the firms. Right? For households, we would have c plus t plus s must be equal to I. Right? Or y is equal to c plus g plus I that we had out. Right? So if we look at the different options here, we have y is equal to c plus g plus I. Or for the household side, we have their income, y, and their expenditure is equal to c plus t plus s. Right? Let's subtract one from the other, and we get 0 equals 0 plus g minus t plus I minus s. That's what that comes from. Just doing, this is accounting, right? Double-sided accounting. There's nothing fantastic here, but it's powerful to understand, especially now when we go to the open economy. We now have a little bit more going on. Our households, where we have our gross national income, right? It's going to be our consumption plus our taxes we pay plus our savings. Firms, they're going to, income that they generate goes to households. And that has to be equal to C plus G plus I plus the net exports. So let's write this out here. We have Y is equal to C plus G plus I plus net exports. Right, and for our households, we have we have two sources of income. We have income from our domestic firms, plus we have net foreign income. right? Net factor income from abroad. What could be, maybe part of your production, maybe you have a firm, right? And you produce some of your goods in Laos, right? Or maybe for your households, maybe your sister is working in Taiwan. And that comes, so we have sources of income from abroad. We're now a global economy, right? We're going to look at domestic demand and demand for domestic goods, right? So it sort of brings us about. So our income per household is the income from our firms producing here at home plus net foreign income. And this has to be equal to our consumption plus our taxes plus our savings. Right. And we can now take the difference between the two. Right. We get minus NFI equals G minus T plus I minus S plus NX. I equals S plus T minus G minus NFI minus NX. And this is what we're going to call the capital account surplus. We can now then also see through the financial sector. Right? What's our dealings with the rest of the world? Right, let's add in one more. So we deal with the rest of the world. We have our income from the rest of the world is our net exports. Right, if that's positive, we're exporting more for the rest of the world than we're importing. So that's a source of positive income. Plus net factor income from abroad. And that's going to be equal to our capital account surplus. But another way to look at this, if we think that maybe this net factor income is small, maybe or constant, then we're going to see that those two things move together. Yeah? So our current account and our capital account, right, it's just mirror images of the same two objects. Right, so if we're exporting more goods than we're importing, then we're exporting more capital than we're importing. And vice versa. So here's our current account. Right, and so this has always been difficult for me. So income of nationals abroad and income of foreigners in the country. So what we want to think about is foreigners and nationals not in terms of citizenship, right, but in terms of more like residency. So you have people, like if you have a family member who works abroad and sends a lot of their income home to help support their family, right, then that's an income from a national abroad. I'm an American living in Germany. My income does not count in this. even though I'm not a German citizen, from this I'm considered domestic from this perspective. Yeah? Right? My income, right? Why? Because I earn the income in Germany and I live in Germany. I consume in Germany, right? So I'm part of the German production. So keep in mind sometimes these ideas of citizenship, right? Politically, really have nothing to do with what we mean by citizenship economically, right? And if you look at many of the debates of immigration in countries, again, look at the United States. There's a lot of, or in Germany, there's a lot of people being upset about high levels of immigration, and it's a little sort of odd because these people they're citizens, they're members of the U.S. economy, even if they're not political citizens of the country. You have people that aren't citizens but who live in the country, whose families live in the country, who earn money in the country, who spend money in the country. They're part of the American economy. They just don't have the right piece of paper, right? Or an economics, because economics not right political side. Yeah? So what is this current accounting? Like, how can we look at this? Right? Yeah, if we bring this about here, this current account, I want that to be here. Albeit I want that to be CA, capital account. That's LB for Leistungsbilanz. That's the German. It's still there. Credit account. No, fine. No, that's actually. We'll keep that for a second. So we can look at this object here. I'm going to call this. We'll call this.
CA plus LB CA. No.
Add in.
Equal to CA. CA.
Add this in here, and here, and we're going to get this current account. Right, and what we see, right, so the current account is essentially then these net exports plus net income from abroad. So what? Let's think about now what this looks like from a financial market perspective. Our investments, net investment is equal to private savings plus public savings minus the current account. So if we have, for a large net exporting country, right, we're exporting capital. In a sense, these are savings, right? So we're exporting abroad, so it doesn't go into domestic investment. What's like one way to think of this that's tangible? So when there's a surplus of goods from China that are exported to the United States, so there's more goods that China sends to the United States than it imports back from the U.S. So there's this extra, right? have more sales, right, than in US dollars, right, then the US gives China in renminbi back. So there's a surplus, like, in currency and purchasing power there. What could China do? Well, they could take these dollars, sell them in financial markets for renminbi, and repatriate it, right, to bring the currency back to China. So what would happen if there's a large-scale sale of dollars to buy renminbi?
Will be green.
Right, so if we're all trying to sell dollars to buy renminbi, we're going to get them fewer renminbi per dollar. That's going to, yeah, it's going to cause an appreciation, right? So this is another way this depreciation could come about, right? So the problem is that China is holding on to these U.S. dollars after the exports. Well, what are they doing with these U.S. dollars, right? Who's buying all these securities? Who's buying up the government debt or other kinds of debt? Well, a lot of it's being bought by U.S. citizens, of course, right? A lot of it's also bought by foreign companies and foreign individuals, right? If I make a lot of sales, I have a lot of extra U.S. dollars, I could buy U.S. securities, I could buy U.S. bonds. So in other words, you could also make the argument that the current account surplus, more exports to the United States than imports. So this is held by foreign and international investors, just to see how much that's gone. Maybe we can, maybe we can add another graph here.
Mẹo dằn dần này. Nhậu của tôi luôn rồi. Xin lỗi nha, mình đã bung dầu này. Không biết tiếng nào kháng chuyện nữa. Ủa dằn dầu tùm lum này, em dính dầu rồi đó. Ý là nè, chị làm đổ dầu như này nè.
They seem to be moving, right, together in the opposite direction. So as we have, so this is U.S. net export, so this goes down. So this is the trade deficit, right? We at the same time have a large increase in, this is also nominal, so we should be correcting this to be real. Nominal. two things are moving together, right? Quite clearly. Right? So we see net exports going down, so we have a trade deficit. So this is China having a surplus with the United States, for example, or the rest of the world having a surplus with the United States. We also have foreign debt holdings by foreigners going up. So right, these net exports, this negative trade balance from the U.S.'s perspective is also what's financing its negative fiscal balance, partially. So I wonder, and again, when we look at we realize that X and M are endogenous. As we start changing these things, we're going to change X and M. I wonder what the consequence is going to be. Right, from the U.S.'s perspective, right now we have a current account that is negative in the U.S. Right, we're able to cover the deficit here. So G in the U.S. is greater than T. So it's a negative number here of the one graph. This is also negative, so minus minus negative is plus. Right, so we're able to fund a portion of the U.S. deficit through our capital imports from abroad, through the trade deficit with the rest of the world. And I wonder if they thought about what's going to happen if we said
Có.
they want to set x minus n to 0. Right? What that's going to do to the finance in the deficit, right? Then what's going to have to happen? Well, S could go up, right? So we have an increase in domestic savings. That might actually have to happen by construction, right? If goods from all the rest of the world become more expensive for U.S. consumers, they're not going to be able to afford to buy as much. Maybe they'll reduce consumption and move towards savings, right? Likely to be a combination, so some increase in savings, but also a decrease in investment. We can think about the consequences of that. All right, so here, like in the open economy, we now have different venues for where increases in investments can come from. Right? For private savings, for public savings, or a worsening of the current account. Right? So running a trade deficit, right, can increase and fund investments. Right? You have a lot of you have a surplus of goods that other countries are selling to you, and from the income, the revenue they generate from that, right, the options are to essentially make a run on their own currency, massive shift back into renminbi, put pressure on their own currency, right, or invest it in the country here where they're running the trade deficit, surplus to, from the U.S. perspective, deficit, right? Okay, right, and then we can rearrange this and okay, so how do you fund the state budget deficit? Right, likewise, right? So, worsening the current account, or running a larger trade deficit, or we have to decrease investments or increase private savings. All right. Right, and so we look at so the United States. We have it's kind of some picture I saw here. Right, the deficits in the United States right have. There have been times when they've been large, and then we balanced the budget. In my lifetime, this has happened a couple of times. We even ran surpluses in the 1990s. All right, so it's really only been in the last 20 years that we've been running such large deficits. Right, and so the difference between savings and investments, so private net savings, positive, negative after the financial crisis, right? We saw there was an increase in savings, right? But at the same time, large government deficits, right? The bailouts and the like, and we've seen Corona, so this is, right? A lot of this is being funded by continually increasing capital imports, right, through our current account deficit. Right, so current account deficit, a trade deficit means capital imports. Right, so we see, right, the one thing that you could say is that perhaps the increase in private savings after the financial crisis was able to reduce some of our capital imports. So now we can look at this in an entirely different way. Let's not look at exports through this idea of goods, selling goods at prices. All right, let's just look at this as through capital movements. Right? How are we going to fund our deficits? How are we going to fund our investments? We can get these resources either domestically through savings, private savings or public savings, or we can import this investment, these funds, this savings, this capital from abroad. Okay, so the U.S. for the capital current account deficit, right, so capital imports. Germany current account surplus. So Germans are really big on soccer, right? And it's really disappointing they've not been doing that great. But they always talk about they want to be world champions. Like the Germans are like big words, very. I'll be an American teacher German word. Germans love this word. Weltmeister, which means world champions. So also, they use this in a lot of expressions. So Germany, in a lot of periods in this time, was the largest exporter in the world, or as Germans like to call themselves, Export Weltmeister. World champions of exports. No, it's the world champions, the biggest exports, biggest exporter. Right? It's almost as important as winning the World Cup in soccer. Right? And so we see these large exports. Right? And this is also then a large export in capital. Right? We had a current account deficit in the 90s. You can think of this as we had reunification. It needed to be financed, and there was a large financing of the unification from abroad. But since then, right, Germany's gone back to world champions of exporting. Right, the high current account deficit in the United States, right, negative trade balance. Right, you can think of this as really the large rise in the net foreign debt holdings. Right, so the U.S. Assets that the U.S. holds abroad versus assets that the rest of the world holds in the U.S. So the net asset position, and it's negative, meaning the rest of the world holds more U.S. assets than the U.S. holds from the rest of the world. Right? The net asset position is not negative; it's continuing to decline. Germany has Weltexportmeister, world champions of exports, has seen then also its capital holdings, its asset holdings from around the world increase, right? And particularly within Europe. And this is also a big, afterwards, since the European debt crisis, a lot of discussions about the effect of the German large exports, perhaps a German unfair competitive advantage, and German assets throughout Europe, right? So in some sense, you could take the discussion that Gesundheit, that the U.S. is having with China, and in the European context, Germany was Europe's China, right? In the sense that they were the large net exporters to the rest of Europe, and also the large, then hence, net Gesundheit, capital exporters. Okay. Right, and so here we can just see this more on a quarterly basis. We have it's the same picture that I just did with the United States, but for Germany, we have the current account surplus or deficit, and then the holdings of the net foreign asset holdings. And so as Germany has run a current account surplus, net exports are positive trade surplus, we've seen them accumulating foreign assets. Right, and this is then, becomes a really large net position. But what's also important, and this is something that you see then, just like with exports and imports of the goods, even though this net contribution was something like 5%, perhaps, remember, we saw that exports as a portion of GDP were like 40%, 45%, and likewise with imports. So the individual positions are very large, and then we have a small net position. Right? So there's enormous holdings, right, of German holdings of assets throughout the world, and there are enormous holdings of German assets by foreigners. Right? So even when you look at this net position, it looks sort of like really going up and down, but it's just lots of small changes in the margins on the margins from right, these current account deficits and surpluses. Right. Okay. Right here, so you can see that within the EU, right, before the financial crisis, right, there's a sort of the big disparity, imbalances in Europe, right, yeah, it's also here we can see that it's Germany was a net foreign position, but the Netherlands as well, so Spain and Greece down here. So it's the whole story of what led to the European debt crisis would be with the net exporters, net importers, current account surpluses, and the core countries of Europe, they called it a current account deficit in the periphery. And there's if we add in yet, here was a more world perspective, so also with China, the current account surplus rate has been, So let's think about how we can now move beyond the goods market and add in this financial market, right, with our financial and money market, the LM side. So let's take our equilibrium in the goods market, and let's just look not instead of imports and exports individually. Let's look at net exports. If we have the Marshall-Lerner condition that holds, then the effect of change in the real exchange rate is going to be negative, right? So the effect of the value effect is outweighed by the quantity effect. All right, we're going to hold price levels constant. We'll just set them right. We'll just set them equal. Right? Real exchange rates and nominal exchange rates are going to be the same. We have no inflation, no actual inflation, no real inflation. Again, so we have real exchange rate or real interest rates is equal to nominal interest rates. So take a long run adjustment. Like we did in the problem set today, but we start off with the standard ISLM perspective. So now we're going to start thinking about asset pricing, and we're going to do this then with a couple more models when we go forward. And the first way to think about asset pricing is through arbitrage. And arbitrage, the idea here is there.
Chào, mình bây giờ mới thấy dầu này. Dầu nó đủ quá trời. Sợ mùi quá, mọi người không thích cái mùi.
So we can think of some check. So let's think about gold. Who likes gold? Why not? I like gold. So let's say a gram of gold costs $2 million in Ho Chi Minh City. But a gram of gold in Bangkok costs $3 million.
Arbitrage.
What would you do? Right, so if you travel between Ho Chi Minh City and Bangkok pretty frequently.
While in Ho Chi Minh and sell in Bangkok.
Yeah, well, exactly. So it costs 2 million in Ho Chi Minh, right, and 3 million here. So, well, this is great. There's how much would you buy 1 gram? You'd buy as much as you could, right? And then do it as often as you could, right? Okay. Are you nice? Do you have friends? I hope, yeah, you have friends. Are you nice to your friends? Are you nice to your friends? Are you going to tell them about this? I mean, it's a no-risk business deal. You're essentially asking your friends, hey, do you want free money? Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, what do your friends do?
Take as much as
They I'm sorry?
take as much as
Yeah, they take as much as they can too. They buy gold in Ho Chi Minh City as well, and bring it to Bangkok as well. Okay.
Demand increase.
They tell their friends. Their friends tell their friends.
Yeah.
And essentially, what do we have? We have massive amount of gold purchases in Ho Chi Minh City. No? What happens when everyone wants to buy the same thing at the market?
The price increase.
Drives the price up, right? All right, so it's not going to stay at 2 million dong anymore. All right, it's going to start going up. And what happens when everyone is trying to sell the same thing? Your gold in Bangkok. It's going to drive the price down. Huh? Well, when is it going to stop? Well, when all of you stop trying to get free money. And when will you stop? When you can't get any free money. When the price in Ho Chi Minh rises up to the price in Bangkok that's falling. When the two of them are equal, then you'll stop. There's no more free money. But wait a second, we've done something amazing. Huh? We've made sure that the price of gold is the same in both of these places. And we can be pretty sure that for some commodities like gold, it's going to be roughly the same price everywhere, because if it wasn't, you could make a lot of money really quick with no risk. And that's like, it doesn't get any better than that in finance, right? That's no risk, high return. Right? We can think of maybe so now let's look at a gram of gold. And I just choose some country. I've never been there. Has anyone here been to Bhutan? No? No. Okay. Small chunk. How about a gram of gold in Vietnam? So here, this is then 2 million BND. And this was 6,000 Bhutanese BTM. I forgot what it's called. Does anyone know what the currency in Bhutan is? Someone can check me real fast on their computer, right? What's it called? So, and we thought about the real exchange rate. Right, we can think of this as what the price should be of grams of gold in Bhutan or grams of gold in Vietnam. Not in terms of currency, but just in trading. How many grams of Vietnamese gold is a gram of Bhutanese gold worth? Same one, right? It's an element. This is the same thing everywhere, right? This real exchange rate should be 1, right? Right now, if I were to say something like, what's a kilogram of Vietnamese rice worth in terms of a kilogram of Thai rice, you might have individual opinions as to a difference in quality. This might not be entirely comparable, right? I'm not going to get involved in any rice debates here, right? But gold is gold, yeah? Okay. So we can already get somewhere, right? We know also that our real exchange rate is the nominal exchange rate times the price or the price level. Right? So if this is equal to 1, right, we should be able to write then that the exchange rate is equal to price abroad, or the price here, 6,000 over 2 million. That is 0.003 or right? What this should be. Now we can let's see what the exchange rate actually is. Let's see if we can make some money. So, Bhutanese Ngulchon. No. So the actual exchange rate, this is good, is 0.00334, or just about 300. So there's a little bit of an opportunity here. Yeah? We can figure out. And so what could we? Let's just go through this. I'm going to buy in Vietnam, sell in Bhutan. Right? So minus, I'm just going to buy 1 gram of gold, 2 million BND. Then I get plus 6,000 Bhutanese yuan. And these guys. Alright, and this gives me, I want to do it the other way. Right? This gives me then 1,700 or 1,797,128 BND. Right, so I've lost money. That's okay. Right? Life is a learning experience. We're going to buy in Bhutan and sell in Vietnam. Okay, so I'm going to spend 1,797,127 BND. Right? This gets me 6,000 Bhutanese Nguyen. I buy 1 gram of gold. And then I sell this for 2 million BND. So I make a nice profit of 200,002 873 BND profit per gram. Right? All right. So let's not buy 1 gram, let's buy 100, let's buy 1,000, let's buy 1,000,000 grams. Right? As much as we can go. Right? And we can make money here. The difference here, there's something. Does anyone know how to get to Bhutan? It might take a while. It might cost some money. I don't know if I can get a visa for Bhutan. Can you get a visa for Bhutan? I don't know. Yeah? This is how we can actually have prices not be equal. This is how the price, the law of one price, might not hold. Right? Because the what would ensure the price is the same is people like us exploiting an arbitrage opportunity, us buying all the gold in Ho Chi Minh, telling our friends, and selling it in Bangkok. Right? That's something we can do really, really quickly. Yeah? Going to Bhutan might be more difficult. Something else it might be law of one price we'll think about in a little bit. Maybe if you have I like the coffee drink that I like here is Cafe Sula, right? The condensed milk. Is that am I saying it right?
Yeah.
Cafe Sula, right? I think I can make a lot of money if I buy that here and sell it in Germany. So I'm going to buy 1 million Cafe Sulas and put them on a boat and send them to Germany. The ice will melt. This isn't going to work. This is a product that's difficult to trade, right? Right? Gold is a lot easier to trade. Right? So there's some things that are perishable, right, or that might be hard to transport. Right? Okay. But now let's think about another opportunity. Instead of gold, Gesundheit.
Securities.
Right? Let's think about a bond.
Exchange.
Let's say the interest rate in Vietnam is 5%, and the interest rate in Bhutan is 10%. Right? Well, if everything else is the same, higher return, right? Fantastic. Okay. So, right, what does this mean? Like if I invest 1 million VND, after 1 year, I have 0.05 million VND, right? Okay. This means that if I start with, let's do 1 million. If I start with a million VND, at the exchange rate now, this turns into 3,338 Bhutanese ngultrum, and then in 1 year, I have $3,672 BTA. All right, which would you rather have in 1 year? 1.05 million dong, or 3,672 ngultrum? How come? Well, it kind of depends on something. Well, I only care about the dong. I don't live. Do you live in Bhutan? No. What's the exchange rate going to be in a year? Oh, do you know what any exchange rate is going to be in a year? If you do, talk to me after class. I'm like, lots of money. No? We don't know what the exchange rate's going to be. Right? If the exchange rate, what if the exchange rate changes? Right? Instead of, what if in 1 year? Because here we had the exchange rate today. Right? E today was 0.00334. What if the exchange rate in 1 year from now is what if it goes up here to 0.01? Right, that would mean this would be divide that by 0.01. Then we would only get, in this case, we would only get then 367,239. Oh, that would be a disaster, right? If the exchange rate stayed constant, right, then we would definitely make more money with the Ngultrum, right? But if we have an appreciation, right, that means the dong becomes more valuable. We have to give up more of these Bhutan that we made to get back our dong, right? Now, what if there, and there is, one exchange rate in a year from now that would leave us indifferent between the two, even though this one has a higher exchange rate? Right? Well, it needs to be the exchange rate such that 3,672 BNT, right, is exactly equivalent to one. This is 1 million. It's 2,000. Right, and that would be 36. So if we have an appreciation, expected appreciation of the dong, then this means that we'll get more Ngulien Bhutan over the year. The value of that in dong is going to go down. We get more of a currency than Ngulien that's worth less in terms of dong over the course of the year. Right? So the higher nominal interest rate is then canceled out by the expected appreciation. So if the expected appreciation of our currency is at just the right level, then we would be indifferent between the two. And we expect this condition perhaps to hold. Why? For the same reason that we thought about gold being the same price in Bangkok as in Ho Chi Minh City. So while it might be difficult for us to move gold between Bhutan and Vietnam, financial markets, trading financial instruments between Bhutan and Vietnam can do that in a flash. Yeah? That's what they're there for. So if this condition doesn't hold, right, there's a lot of instant money, free money arbitrage opportunities. Right? The difference we might have is it's not entirely clear what this exchange rate expectation is going to be. Right? Or we might have different expectations. No one knows exactly what this is going to be. This is after the fact. If it turns out to be this way, then we wouldn't have made any profit. Right? But maybe I expect it to be higher. If I expect it to be higher, then I'm going to stay in dong. Maybe you expect it to be lower than this, then you'll invest in Bhutanese debt. Yeah? Right? We're not sure. No one knows the future for certain. Because if you know the future for certain, then we can make right, an amount of currency. So then here I have an example between the euro and the dollar. It's just essentially the same thing that we did here. And so we can rearrange this equality, this relationship, and say how relate the current exchange rate to the ratio of interest rates and the expected exchange rate. And so if we hold these future expectations constant, right, what we need, right, in order if the interest rate at home rises relative to the foreign interest rate, then the exchange rate, current exchange rate rises, right? An appreciation in our foreign currency. Right? So if our central bank raises the nominal interest rate, we would expect the exchange rate also to go up, right, in order for the expected change over time in the exchange rate to cover the change in the spread between these interest rates. Right? So if one country's interest rate goes up and the exchange rate doesn't change, right, this implies that there's now an opportunity to engage kind of in a shifting gold from Ho Chi Minh to Bangkok. Yeah? So, right, yeah, that's what I just said. We can draw this out, right, and relate the domestic interest rate to, let's say the domestic interest rate is equal to the world interest rate or foreign interest rate. We started some parity relationship where our exchange rate is equal to maybe the long run expected interest rate, right? So the situation where I is with I star, this cancels out and E is equal to the future expected exchange rate. And now we can ask the question, what happens if the domestic interest rate rises? Right. Well, if the domestic interest rate rises, you can just read off here, then the exchange rate must go up. We must have an appreciation. Okay, so for our equilibrium conditions, we now have our goods equilibrium. For net exports, we have nominal exchange rates because we have this Keynesian assumption, prices are constant. Likewise, we have nominal interest rates here. We have our LM, and now we have our foreign exchange market equilibrium, right, with an interest rate parity condition. That the interest rates or the net of exchange rate effect returns has to be equal between both countries. Otherwise, we're going to have massive purchases or selling. People are going to take advantage of these arbitrage opportunities until they're closed. All right, so we can now substitute this in essentially into net exports. All right, and we have consumption depends on consumption and net exports depend on our income. Positive for consumption, negative for net exports. The interest rate, domestic interest rate affects investment and net exports negatively. All right, so now we have some more transmission channels of monetary policy. If we change the nominal interest rate, if we change money supply, change the nominal interest rate, this directly affects investment. But now, a change in interest rate affects the exchange rate, which then affects net exports. Right? So an indirect channel here, right? The exchange rate channel. And if we draw this out, we'll do the same ISLM as before, and now we just add another picture to the right, where we can follow what happens with the exchange rate. Right, and we can work through kind of like we did today. We saw if we just if the short-term interest rates are affected by monetary policy and not the long-run interest rates that are also essential for investment, we might change the slopes. So here the IS curve we saw from before, right? We get a change in the slope of the goods demand curve from the dependence of imports on domestic income. So the IS curve in the end might have a different slope. It might be steeper or shallower, flatter than in the closed economy. But for us, for right now, this doesn't matter. We still have a downward sloping IS, and we're still going to have an upward sloping LM curve. Right? Those two components are going to go through. And so we can look then at the same government policy before. Let's look at expansive fiscal policy. Right, we're going to get a multiplier. The multiplier, right, the increase in output is going to be smaller than if the nominal interest rate was constant, because there's an adjustment of the nominal interest rates. And now we can say like two things. From before, right, if we have a more steeply sloped IS curve, right, then this multiplier is going to be smaller than before. Right? And the effect of the nominal interest rate increase, right, is also going to reduce this by more, right, because we have, right, not just the effect of reducing investments, we're also going to reduce net exports with the increase in the interest rate. And that happens by increasing our exchange rate. It appreciates our currency. Right? So if we increase the nominal interest rate, this appreciates our currency, which means there are more units of foreign currency that have to be paid for each one of our units of currency. Right? They become more valuable. Our goods become more expensive. Right? There's less demand for our goods. Exports go down. Our demand for goods from abroad goes up. Right? Foreign goods are cheaper, so imports go up. So our net exports go down. So it's going to have a stronger effect, a stronger decrease on output than just the change in investments by itself. Right? Contractionary monetary policy. Here, right, it's the same. The same qualitative movement. LM curve shifts upward or inward. This increases the nominal interest rate. Right? Just reading off the interest parity relationship, this leads to an appreciation of our currency. Right? If we pay a higher interest rate than the exchange rate that we have today, it needs to go up in order to reduce this expected depreciation or appreciation over time. Okay. All right, now we can think we'll pick this up then tomorrow. Want to look at some numbers, looking at them historically at the United States. And then we'll talk about fixing exchange rates, right, as a monetary policy rule, and then we'll move on to the next topic. So we didn't get quite done today. We're a little bit behind schedule, but that's because I got so interested in looking at this reciprocal tariff calculation. Yeah? So I'll see you tomorrow. And I think this is really my hope from this course and from your studies as well is that not only do you learn the tools you could grades on exams and get yourself in a position to maybe pursue another degree after this or to apply this to just like in daily political discourse, right, and the news, you should come out of this program and be able to at least critically think about these things at a level that look, I mean, the news media in America went crazy over this, having specialists come and explain the complicated, mathematics that went behind this. I'm not kidding you, right? And this is nothing is impressive about this at all, right? And you're all in a position to think about this and to wonder perhaps if this really is sensible. So. I'm not going to take this homework. I took it for lunch, but